Welcome to Codex Rex, the video game history podcast. My name is Dachz, and I am your host, and this is...
Well, hi, I'm Tyler. And I don't know what we're going to talk about today.
No, he doesn't, yeah, because this podcast is about video game history, and we talk about video game history-related things. But first off, how have you been, Tyler?
I'm doing okay. Busy as always, but I have had a bunch of gaming time recently. So I'm almost at the end of Dark Souls 3. Mm-hmm. I just beat the last boss of the last DLC last night. So
nice.
Oh man, he's so hard to beat solo. Oh my gosh. But I think there's just like a side boss I need to beat, the scary dragon, and I don't know. I think Ruby and I are going to try and take that one on. You're welcome to come as well, since I will. You've never beaten it, right?
I'd love to do that. I have not beaten it yet either.
Crazy hard.
I do love the game though, and I'd be happy to join.
It's so good. What about you, man?
Well, I've been studying for university, but I've also been playing games, and I don't know, this is not nerdy enough for these circles that we spend time in, but I like to watch soccer, and it's the European Championship right now, so I watch a lot of soccer. Throw a stone at me. It's okay, I can handle it.
Dude, I'm not going to throw a stone at you. I just am going to silently judge you.
It's fine.
No, jokes aside, people love sports for a reason, right? It's exciting. It's fun. You get to have that sort of like team spirit, even though you're not on the team.
Yeah,
right?
I'm into it.
Yeah, it's fun. I've mentioned here on here before that I'm not a big sports guy, but I understand why people are sports guys.
I try not to be a jerk about it, because I know many sport guys are jerks about it, and I think I don't talk about it too much. Today we thought about doing something different, didn't we?
We did. So we had an idea, and we're cruising along in episodes here, which I'm really happy about. We have our same little formula at the start of every episode, and we thought today that we would do something just a little bit different. And that is, if you want, you can send us an email. And if you send us an email, we want you to tell us what your first video game experience was. Okay. We'll pick our favorites and we'll read them on air. And our favorites may or may not get some dumb game out of my stash of Humble Bundle codes that you are welcome to.
Yeah, Tyler has this stash of games that nobody wants, and whenever somebody does him a favor, instead of paying the money, he gives them a game that nobody wants. And then he thinks that is proper compensation, even though it's not, but nobody can do anything about it. I don't know. So that's
the terms of the contract when you sign it, Docs.
I know, I did. I get paid in those games.
In those art contests, they always say prizes include, but they never say, I actually did used to give out like vouchers for merch and stuff. And then that became a real issue because I had to get like people's addresses and then things would get lost in the mail. And so we just switched to like digital codes for video games. But so codexrexpodcast@gmail.com. Send us your first experience with a video game, your first video game memory, and we'll read our favorites on the air on the next episode.
Yeah. What's your first video game experience?
Oh man. Okay. I can think of it vividly. So I was like 3 years old and my uncle was playing one of the early Mega Mans on the NES. And he was so good at Mega Man, like the originals. And, remember, this is a time before save features were really a thing, although some of the later games had passwords you could use. And he had made it to Dr. Wily, and the room was tense, right? You could tell he was really focused. And I, as a small child, began to become frightened of this whole situation. It was like the tension was too much for me. So I climbed on the back of the couch and I started to cry. And my grandma came into the room and she went, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Because he's at the last boss and I'm worried he's gonna die."
That's so cute.
So I remember it vividly. Couldn't tell you if he beat Wily or not, but I remember standing on the back of this couch and bawling.
I just remember I must have been 4 years old, and me and my brother would be sent to babysitters a lot. to stay at their place while they were doing something. And one of my babysitters had a computer on which there was the original Lemmings game.
Ooh.
And his babysitting would be sit on that chair and watch me play this game. And I was totally fine with it because this game looked so fascinating. How you made the little lemmings walk around and dig these tunnels and build these bridges. And I was completely fascinated with this concept of a game on a screen, but you influence it. And that was my favorite babysitter. And I can't remember how they looked like or what their name was. But I loved that they played games with me all day.
It's fascinating what sticks with you in that regard, right?
Right.
Maybe that's why you like your brand of Dachz games where you have control over things.
Yeah, it was a puzzle game. All right.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. So if you want to send us an email, codexrexpodcast@gmail.com. If you want to hit us up on Twitter, it's just Codex Rex Podcast on Twitter. And you can find me 3 days a week on Twitch. And my name is just Vegan Tyler. That's it. Reach out. Come hang out with us.
Yes.
All right, let's do this shit.
Okay. I have to say one thing first. So,
all right, hit me with it.
You know how I stretch the boundaries of what qualifies as a video game history podcast thing, right?
Yeah.
This will be one of those times where you will go, what the fuck am I listening to? Or when do we get to the video game part? What's going on? And there's not going to be a video game part for a while. But please bear with me. Because I think that this episode is an approach to an answer to like answer one of the questions about video games that is really important.
Okay.
Because it will kind of answer why we have to do this podcast. And while it is also your job to just listen to me and make wacky comments, I would also ask you to figure out this question. What is the big question about video games that comes from this that I will tell you?
Okay. So let me see if I understand here. You are going to tell a story, and I'm going to try to infer the question that we are asking about video games. Did I get that right?
Yeah, and that will be answered by what I will tell you now.
Okay.
You will know what I mean.
Okay.
You smart man.
Don't give me too much credit.
Oh, no, don't worry about it. So let's do this.
I don't get hints very well. I don't understand subtlety.
It's not going to be subtle, dude. Let's do this.
All right, let's do it.
It is the 29th of September, 1934. We find ourselves in the town of Fiume, a town in what was part of the kingdom of Italy back then. A child is born that will be known as Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. We call him Mihaly.
Okay.
Mihaly wasn't actually Italian, but his family came to Italy because his dad was a diplomat in the Hungarian consulate in Fiume. As we know and talked about many times before, the 30s and 40s were a dangerous time to be an everyday European. World War II started when Mihaly was 10 years old, and his two older half-brothers served in the military. One of his brothers would die during the siege of Budapest. His other brother would survive the war but then die in a Siberian labor camp.
Oof.
His family was not on good terms with the communists. So when the Reds took over the Hungarian government, where they originally came from, in 1949, his dad stepped down as a diplomat while they were staying in Rome. The new Hungarian government, which was communist, promptly responded by stripping Mihali's entire family of their citizenship. So they
Wow.
were stateless. Pretty messed up, right?
Yeah, that's a rough spot to be in.
Yeah. So Mihaly, he was just 15 years old when this happened. And to make money, his dad opened up a restaurant in Rome. And Mihaly dropped out of school to help out by working and making some money for the family. And one thing really struck Mihaly during this time of horrible tragedy, and it was that all of these grown-up people around him were completely unable to withstand the frustration and pain that was brought upon them by this war and these disastrous conflicts. He noticed how once these people lost their home, their job, and their secure surroundings, they were completely unable to maintain happiness.
Interestingly, they've done studies about PTSD, and that PTSD, like the effects of trauma, can reverberate through generations, right? Like,
yes, absolutely.
The effect that it has on one person affects their children and can affect their children's children due to how they deal with this trauma, and then how that affects how they raise their kids.
Yeah, a good example, if you want to read something on that, it's a comic book, a graphic novel. You could say it's Mouse.
Oh yeah, I know Mouse.
Which is not only a story about a person that was a victim of the Holocaust, but also about their children in America and how it influenced them as humans to have grown up to someone who was the victim of the Holocaust. But yeah, this observation of human nature at a very young age sparked this interest within Mihaly. And there was this interest about what contributes to a life worth living, because he was looking for this reason for happiness that people could have. And this initial question about life itself turned Mihaly into quite the philosopher all through his adolescence. He started reading up on all kinds of different approaches to give him an answer to this big question. He read up on philosophy, on religion, got invested into art just to find an answer. How does one become a happy human being? This is a question that all of us ask ourselves a lot of times, and it's so difficult and generalized that you can't really find an answer to that. But he was persistent.
Everyone has their own answer to that, I think.
Absolutely,
and, I think that this is the difficult part of being a human at times, is that we are so social, and we're so willing to compare ourselves to others when everybody's sort of in their own story. And what makes one person happy might not make another person happy, and so looking at others and seeing them happy, or like looking on their social media and thinking like, oh man, they're so happy all the time, doesn't necessarily mean that you could get fulfillment in that same way, or that you can't be happy in your own way. And I don't know, I'm tangenting here, but I think that happiness is really subjective, and we have this idea of like, just be happy, bro. Look at so-and-so, they're happy, but it's not always that easy,
Welcome to Codex Rex, the Video Game History Podcast, the podcast where we talk about human introspection and not about video games at all. Yeah, it's tough. It's a really personal question that you can generally answer for everybody.
Yeah. Video games are made by people, and people are complex.
Yeah. So he's on this search, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by random chance, he encountered the science of psychology. He was a young adult by now, and for some reason he found himself at a Swiss ski resort. He was completely broke and without any way to find enjoyment. All the snow had melted, he couldn't afford anything fun that a young man could do at a Swiss ski resort. So he just started reading through the newspaper to find something to do, and in there he found some dude was going to do a presentation, like a lecture, on flying saucers, like UFOs.
Okay. What year is this?
It's like 1950 or 1949, I think. Pretty close after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And this lecture was going to be in the center of Zurich, because there was this huge hype of people sighting flying saucers all of a sudden, like things in the air that would come to take us away. And Mihaly was like, fuck yeah, I'm bored out of my mind. And this sounds like the wackiest thing I can imagine. Let's listen to this lecture about flying saucers. So he went to this evening lecture by a man he describes as very interesting. Um, Imagine,
Okay.
I mean, Mihaly was going into this lecture with some expectations, right? He thought this
Right,
was going
right.
to be some nut job talking about little green men and stuff.
Hmm.
But he was entirely wrong. This was not what this lecture was about. This lecture was about the psyche of the Europeans and how the trauma of the war is now causing them to project this trauma into the sky. And
Oh.
he claimed that the reason for these imaginary flying objects is to bring order into a world that has been burned to ashes, and in this chaos of war. And imagining flying saucers, UFOs, is a mechanism to cope with the pain and nothing else.
Well, that's fascinating.
Mihaly instantly felt like that this had parallels to his questions. Like this question he was carrying around his entire life: how does one maintain a happy life? Because this coping mechanism was a very sane explanation for something that seemed like inexplicable madness.
Well, I mean, it's like, it's why people, get really into conspiracy theories, right? Like, in the modern day, or at any point, because it's like easier to believe that there's some grand Machiavellian scheme than it is to believe that the world just sucks sometimes,
Yeah,
like it's easier for some people to cope by thinking that there is something going on, rather than just, oh, it's random bullshit that just came together in a really shitty way.
it makes you feel in control.
Because now you know the truth. You know what's going on, what's really up to, the government's really up to, and they're coming after you, or whatever it might be that day.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this explanation for Mihaly, it touched the root of the human mind, and thereby it also touched what happiness is.
Hmm.
Like there was a glimpse of what it might be for Mihaly. So he started reading the books of this person, and I don't know if you know this person, but he's rather famous in certain circles. His name is Carl Jung, and he's basically like the most relevant psychological contemporary of Sigmund Freud. Like they
Okay.
knew each other. They were kind of like rivals in science, and until this day, I know some people that work in this field. There's like rivaling psychoanalyst groups where one of them they only listen to what Freud said and the others only listen to what Jung said, and they have like clashes sometimes where they start huge fights in the newspaper or something. It's really funny. So yeah,
I
but
am
yeah.
really surprised that there are even still devotees of Freud, given just how much cocaine he did, and just like how he just made up so much shit on the spot. And like, I think, granted, my time in psychology was limited. I almost did psychology in undergrad, but I the gist I always got was like that Freud was like an okay thought piece. Like, you could look at some of his work and like think about it and think about whether or not it applies, but that we shouldn't really take it as how things are.
Yeah, this topic is so complicated that it is an issue for an entire
Yeah.
podcast about something like why Freud is still relevant and why we still have to talk about him, but why he's also kind of irrelevant is it's a bit too much for today. But you totally have a
It's true.
point. But we are not talking about Freud, we're talking about Jung. He was a bit different.
Uh-huh.
He had a different approach to things. And this is how Mihaly got into psychology. So even though this Carl Jung, during that time, already had made quite the name for himself, he was well known back then already, Mihaly, during this lecture, had heard of him for the first time. And this encounter inspired Mihaly's entire life. He would go on to the path to become a psychologist himself. And he started his professional career by emigrating into, where do you emigrate to in this time? To the USA. At the age of 22. He went to Chicago and started studying psychology, but his goals remained the same, trying to understand the roots of happiness. During his studies, he looked at a bunch of different things to figure out what causes happiness. Like one might think, okay, maybe money makes people happy. So like this, he did this TED talk in 2004, which I really recommend listening to because he's hyper cute. He's like the cutest psychologist from Hungary you can imagine. But he does this TED talk in 2004, and he brings up this statistic that he was part of, like he helped create it. And I think it's one of those statistics everybody has heard of, but never saw the actual data for it. It's the statistic called Has Economic Growth Advanced Human Morale? And it's set in the US and was created by doing surveys of people's income and connected to people's own opinion about the general state of happiness. And what it shows is that the average income, adjusted to inflation, has tripled between 1956 and 1998, but the amount of people that claim that they are very happy has always remained at 30%.
I would also be really curious. I would also be really curious about those statistics. As a guy who messes with stats, because the average income in the United States has gone up, but that is heavily skewed by top earners. Like we don't have to go into a long tangent here, but the income inequality in the United States is really bad. And so a lot of economic growth happens to be at the top, and that doesn't necessarily, apply to lower and middle class earners. Yeah. And so sometimes a much better metric is to look at the median income rather than the average, but still fascinating either way.
Yeah, and what they generally concluded from this was that the happiness of people after having an income about a few $1,000s above the poverty level wouldn't further increase by gaining further material well-being. And so you if you have a certain amount of money, you don't get any happier from having more money. That kind of was to be expected, right? Mihaly didn't, like, the scientists that did that probably didn't go into this and think like, money makes everybody happy. We figured it out. This is it. They were just covering bases.
That's the answer. It's money.
Yes. But like they were like, this was trying to answer some of the big questions of humanity, and to do this, you have to answer one of some of the smaller questions.
I'm laughing because I suddenly just thought about Bear from the Magnavox episode, who was like, I was really depressed until $100,000 landed in my account, and then I was feeling much better. And I'm like, yeah, fucking, of course you would.
Yeah. I mean, everybody but Bear, maybe. Bear was happy with money too. Yeah.
Also, I think it's really important to remember that this is, these kind of things are aggregate data, and, it's lumping everybody together.
Yeah.
Individual experiences may vary. I will still take $100,000 in my bank account right now. Hit me up. I don't know, oat milk or some shit. Oatly. Hit me up. Sponsorship opportunity.
There's something else.
$100,000. I'm sorry, I'm ruining your good story here with bullshit.
It's okay. We're at a break point. There's going to be a switch now to something else, because we talked about how money doesn't make you happy. But during this study, they figured something else out, because they also knew what kind of professions these people had that they were asking. And what they kind of encountered, for some reason, certain professions generally claimed to be happier than others. And those were specifically certain professions that do not pay well. Like, he looked at artists, athletes, and scientists, because for some reason these people seem to be much more happy with their lives than others. And not only because he found them to be more happy a lot of times, but also because as an artist or scientist, you will live your life doing things for which you will probably never be recognized or paid a proper wage. Neither academia nor art nor sport make you rich. It's usually the opposite.
Depends on what level of sports, but yes.
Yeah, of course, there's always scientists that make a bunch of money, and a lot like artists that are hyper rich. But these are, this is the rarest occasion.
So I guess when I hear these things, is it because it allows them to find fulfillment in what they're doing?
That's what he was thinking. He was like, why is this? Why are these people? Why do they claim to be happier than others?
I mean, I can tell a personal story here. I mean, I got out of undergrad and didn't directly get into grad school and was like mildly directionless for a little while. And I went and worked retail, and it was like really strange because it was like they had crowned me as the new king of retail. And I worked in a large chain, right? And like I would get all these great reports, and they were like trying to promote me to these higher level positions. And there was talk that I might go like take over a store. And I'm looking at these jobs that are like, $90,000 a year to start and things like that. And I gave it all up. I gave it all up to go to grad school and study politics because that was interesting to me. And now I am massively in debt and, in like the gazillionth year of my dissertation. But the reason I did it was because I knew that I would never find fulfillment in working retail for the rest of my life. And
That
no offense to those who do retail, I just knew myself and I knew what I wanted. And I knew that that wasn't something that I wanted to do.
what you're saying is really interesting because you exchanged something that gave you extrinsic motivation, where you were
Mm-hmm.
motivated from the outside. People were giving you recognition for what you were doing, and people were giving you money for what you were doing and giving you a perspective. And you exchanged that for something that had intrinsic motivation out of yourself.
Right. It was something I wanted to do for me.
And that is really important. And that is going to be really important for what we're going to talk about next. So Mihaly, he started interviewing these people, right? And this is like one of the excerpts of an interview Mihaly did with a composer,
Okay.
where they describe how it feels to create a piece of music. You are in an ecstatic stage to such a point that you feel as though you almost don't exist. I have experienced this time and time again. My hand seems devoid of myself, and I have nothing to do with what is happening. I just sit there watching it in a state of awe and wonderment, and the music just flows out of itself. So,
Hmm.
this ecstasy of creation that is described by this person, it seems like they were stepping into like this alternate reality where nothing was ordinary anymore. And
Like they
Mihaly,
had transcended themselves almost.
yeah, right? Uh,
Yeah.
like it seems a bit extravagant, like maybe it's just an artist talking in a weird way about their art.
There is something like that to the act of creation, though.
Right.
To be like, I made this thing. Like, I pulled this out of my brain and willed it into the world where it did not exist before. It's a really cool feeling.
And that's something that Mihaly encountered in many interviews with many artists. So he has an
Yeah.
interesting point about this. He like, if you look at most things that we have from past civilizations, like the ancient Romans, the Aztecs, the Zhao dynasty, we have like old temples, we have massive graves, we have circuses and theaters, and loads of these places are not places of these ordinary human experiences, but they are exactly of these feelings of ecstasy. Places where you would stand beside yourself and become one with these extraordinary events. And Mihaly claims that we have proof, because of this, that people have always been craving this feeling that this composer could summon by himself, this feeling of ecstasy.
Hmm.
And instead of having to go into the arena to watch people fight and get overwhelmed by this emotional state, he only requires a piece of paper and pen to reach the state of complete bliss. And there's other things this composer said to Mihaly, like he felt like he didn't exist, which at first seemed to Mihaly like it was a romantic exaggeration an artist would do to make a point. But during further interviews, he kept getting similar descriptions of people claiming like they lost all feeling of self during these moments of ecstasy. And Mihaly, he had like this idea about why this would be happening. Us, as humans, we can only take in a certain amount of information at a time. And with information, he means like anything that you can feel, like that you feel your arm, that you feel that you are hungry, that you listen to someone. The
Okay.
slightest sensation must be processed, and it gets stacked onto this mound of information that has a limited size. And Mihaly calls these fragments of information that constantly flow into you bits. And during his 40-year research, he would be able to differentiate a whole bunch of quantifiable boundaries for this concept. Quantifiable meaning that he tried to establish countable measurements for how much information a normal human can take. So according to him, the average human can take in about 110 of these bits per second. But he
Okay.
didn't only figure out this maximum value, like build a model for it, but he tried to distinguish what amount of bits certain human interactions would sum up to, like listening to a person. How much does that take? He's like, about 60, came up with this number. Like he just built a model around it, because if you have a limit of 110 bits and listening to a person takes 60, that's why you can't listen to two persons simultaneously, because listening to
Okay.
two persons would take 120 bits.
So let me make sure I'm following here. So bits are just what he sort of made up, right?
It's a measurement system he made up. Yeah,
it's just completely. I'm going to use this word, but it's completely arbitrary, right?
It is, yeah.
Like he has made it up. It's his own scale.
He's building a model so he can work with it.
Okay, and so he's using things like speaking to someone as a baseline experience to create this model so that there's comparison between things.
Yes.
Okay, and so a bit is just an abstract amount of stuff you could pay attention to at one time.
There's no comparison to like a computer bit or something. It's
right.
It's just an abstract term he just borrowed from computer science.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure I was clear.
Yeah. So yeah, this also explains why you can't listen to two people simultaneously if you have an average human mind. And then and from this point, if we establish this model, with this, he went back to the interview with the composer. And he was like, okay, let's assume that this model is correct. You always know every model is always incorrect, but you make models to understand things better. That's how models work.
Yeah.
So he went back to this composer and his loss of existence, like he didn't feel like he was there anymore. And what if this process of creating music takes up so much of this maximum information intake that his mind does not have enough bits per second left to monitor how his body is doing?
Interesting.
And like, not just that, nothing outside of his artistic action has any room left within this flow of information. No hunger, no pain, no exhaustion. His physical form disappears to his inner eye, and with it does his identity entirely. He just disappears, literally.
So, have you ever had like things that you were so focused on that it's just like the outside world doesn't exist?
Yeah.
So sometimes when I have the time and I'm able to paint minis, sometimes it's like I get into this focus zone where I have really good music on and I'm just staring at a mini and I'm just painting and painting and painting and painting. And then I look up and like 4 hours have gone by and I'm just having the fucking time of my life. And it's like I have just completely stopped caring about anyone else or any other thing. And I've just like lost myself in it. And that's just like the most recent thing that comes to mind, like obviously playing a video game, but
that is exactly that. That is exactly what these artists describe. And because they always also describe a complete loss of time. They have no reference to how time passes anymore. So while for this composer, or for you, the painting like becomes the entirety of the consciousness, because there's a limit of how much attention you can pay. Now, one might be thinking, wait, what? 1 second. Does this mean to reach happiness, I just have to completely swamp myself in work all the time? So I'm like, is this what this means? And like,
I'll tell you, as from experience, that doesn't work.
And that's also not the point that Mihaly was trying to make with this model.
Right.
First off, this is a model. It's inherently incorrect. It's just to get a better understanding of things. But second, this is not about overwhelming yourself with information, but to have found an activity that is highly complex, but you are also very good at. So it can
Mm.
perfectly fit into your consciousness. It's like a balance between skill and challenge that completely is able to fill you out. And it must fit so well that the activity can continue without you thinking about it because you know it so well. And because it moves forward, but also and it has to move forward constantly, and it has to leave no room for anything else, not even your own existence. And that is only possible if you never have to go into introspection or reflection on what you are doing. Because this is why it only works if you have perfected the skill that you're currently using. This is why it works for you with painting, because you're really good mini painter. You've done it for years. You know how to do it. This is why the composer can completely lose himself, because he does not have to think about composing. It just can flow through him.
Well, I accept your comment on mini painting, but
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those like I look at it and go, "Oh, I could be so much better." But,
Yeah, but you do it
you're right.
afterwards. During the process itself, you have developed techniques so thoroughly that you often don't have
Mhm.
to think about it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like an autopilot. Like
Yeah.
you're looking at it and
Ooh,
then you go,
interesting word.
that would be you look at it and you go, that would be this shade of blue, and then you go pull that blue out of the box and you're painting it and you don't even have to think about it. You just looked
Yeah.
at it and you knew, right? Like what would be best for it. But that takes a long time to be able to look at something and know what would look good on it, right?
And this is something that Mihaly noticed too. All of these people that claim to be very happy with their jobs, with their artistic jobs and their scientific academia jobs, these were all people that were highly experienced in a certain field and had like perfected, or not perfected is an overstatement, but had
Sure.
a very developed technique for this skill that they were using. And the important point here is that not everybody can reach the state of ecstasy from composing or from painting minis, but only the composer can, because he is very well trained in what he's doing. The technique is highly developed, so the process itself requires no self-reflection whatsoever. And all of these descriptions that he got from people he interviewed often contain this massive metaphor of something flowing. So Mihaly used this name, this mental state, and he named it the flow experience, or short, flow, which is
Hmm.
today a generally accepted term for the experience that you just described for yourself for painting.
How interesting.
Let's see another quote from a poet that one of Mihaly's students interviewed. It's like opening a door that's floating in the middle of nowhere, and all you need to do is go and turn the handle and open it and let yourself sink into it. You can't particularly force yourself through it, you just have to float. And if there's any gravitational pull, it's from the outside world trying to keep you back from the door. It's like, imagine, like when I do art, like when I'm super
Hmm.
fixed into doing one of these stupid memes I do for your channel, where I start doing it, and all of a sudden, 6 hours later, and I painted an entire bird with that's animated and shit like that.
Hmm.
And I get into this state, but as soon as something from, like, if my wife walks in or if something else happens, I completely break out of this hyper focused state, of this flow
Hmm.
experience. So it's a balance act, right? You have to balance to yourself to stay in it.
That's really fascinating because, like when I'm working on my academic work, I have to be, I call it in the zone, right?
Mhm.
My fiance calls it tunneling.
Yeah.
She's only looking down the tunnel. She can't see anything on her peripheral. She has to look down the tunnel. But like I'm very distractible, and so the second something pulls me out of the zone, uh it's hard for me to go back in. Like that's always the hardest part for me, is getting started and getting moving, because I'm constantly distracted by things. But if I can turn off all the distractions and just focus, I can
Yeah.
I can flow, right?
Once you flow, it's okay, but you have to start flowing. And it's
Hmm.
not something you can really do. You cannot actively engage flowing. It kind of has to happen by itself. It's
Right.
really weird. But everybody, I think many people might be able to relate to this sensation and know what we're talking about. Like, it's not
Yeah.
something you can force. And let's hear one last quote from an interview, because it's really interesting, because it uses a word that you just used too. It's from an Olympic ice skater. And they say, it was just one of those programs that clicked. I mean, everything went right. Everything felt good. It's just such a rush. Like you feel it could go on and on and on. Like you don't want to stop because it's going so well. It's almost so as you don't have to think. It's like everything goes automatically without thinking. It's like you're an automatic pilot. So you don't have any thoughts. You hear the music, but you're not aware that you're hearing it because it's all part of it all. And now
I never thought of that in the context of ice skating, but I suppose you could apply that to like any kind of. I'm going to lump skating in with dance, but any kind of dance or performative art, right?
Yeah.
Being able to lose yourself in the performance.
Yes, absolutely. And what's happening now is that we have nearly arrived to where we want to be, because this is still a video game history podcast. And we just need to take like a few more steps until we reach the video game connection. But maybe you're seeing it already. I don't know.
So should I tell you what I'm thinking here?
Yeah, sure.
So are we essentially talking about like why we play video games?
Yes.
Like in an abstract way? And perhaps the answer is because we can lose ourselves in them, right? Like
that is at least the answer we would get from taking the flow approach. If you would say the flow theory is correct, which we know it partially is, flow might be a reason why we love this and why we love video games. And I think it might be a very broad question, but I think it's an important question to ask in a video game history podcast: is why do we love video games? Why do we want to take part in this?
I mean, just at a base level, I think that you could apply this to other forms of art too, right? Like think about people who are just super into books, right? Just read all the time. They can't wait for a new book to come out. The new book in the series is going to come out. They have favorite authors. They go to book clubs. They hang out and they talk about books they read. Similar, right? It's just a more passive experience. Video games are just a more active experience of telling a story. And so I think that to psychoanalyze this even further, I think a question would just be like, why do we like stories? Why do we like telling tales? If you really want to distill this, but I'm curious where you go with this.
To go further with what you just said, and to jump ahead a bit, Mihaly actually also figured out that flow can happen with any activity. There's no limit to what it can be. You just have to love it.
Huh.
And there has to be this, a few conditions have to be met, and he kind of extracted these conditions and standardized them so people could use them. That's why his theory is used a lot, because he did a really good job at standardizing the questions that you have to ask and the conditions that have to be met, so you can use it well in a psychological environment. So what we see from these quotes that we just read is that there seems to be a few aspects of being in this flow state, these conditions that I talked about, and how Mihaly defined them. It's like 7 conditions. I'm just going to read them and talk about them a bit, but I think they very clearly describe what we already talked about. The first condition is you need to intensely concentrate on the here and now, what is happening. No thought of the past, no thought of the future. Second, you have to feel that your actions are separated from reality, so that the thing is just itself. It's an alternate reality. Then you have to know what needs to be done. So if there's any self-reflection, you will immediately drop out of the flow state. You have to know that you can do it. So if there's doubt, if the challenge that's in front of you cannot be done by you, you will also drop out of the flow state. That's what it's another aspect of having perfected the technique. The 5th one is that you have to lose any worry and awareness of yourself. So any pain, any hunger, anything needs to leave. You have to lose any sense of time, and the action must motivate itself. Intrinsic motivation, remember? The reason why you chose a different life path, because the motivation comes out of itself, because that is what causes you to feel good about it, to be able to lose yourself in it. And none of these things you can force, right? You think like these are conditions, but I can't make these happen. I can't go like, I am concentrating myself now intensely and I will not be interrupted because this is all, I will lose my sense of time now. Zip, ooh, it's 5 hours later.
Although I don't know about you, but I can definitely set up the conditions in which it could occur, but that doesn't mean that it does.
That's a
So
good
for
point.
example, like I know that if I really need to focus, I need to be alone in the room, or my cell phone needs to be off, or like there are literally days where I will unplug my internet so that I will work, and do things so that I'm not distracted, knowing that that pulls me out of my zone. But that doesn't mean I'll feel it. I could still open up all my work I need to do, or get out my minis, or whatever it is I'm going to do that day, and still not like feel it.
Yeah, this is why these conditions are so important, because they don't tell you you have to reach this, but they indirectly tell you you have to build an environment in which this is possible.
Right.
Which is why, to jump ahead a little bit, Mihali's theories are very well renowned in the corporate world, like to optimize work processes. How do I make the worker go into flow? How do I build an environment that's good for my workforce? Stuff like that. Work psychologists love Mihali's shit.
I'm sure.
Um,
How do I make my workers love their work?
yes. Maybe pay them. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, gee, what a fucking novel concept.
So yeah, these rules Mihali and his peers came up with by conducting thousands and thousands of interviews over several decades. Like he did 40 years of work just on this.
Holy shit.
And he's still working on it. He's still alive.
Wow.
And they kind of describe what this flow experience, where it can come from. And what he figured out, we talked about this already, it can come from anything that you do. Anything can induce this flow state as long as these conditions are met. And as long as it has to be challenging in any way, and the challenge has to meet your skill level. This is a bit complicated to talk about, because a challenge of something can also be adjusted by how you do it, right? Like watching TV can be challenging if you're concentrating really hard and if you want to see what's going on. So you have to have a certain skill level. So he even says watching TV can induce a flow state if you're really invested into what you're watching. So you're really paying attention to see the details.
Well, I mean, think about watching a movie by yourself with no distractions versus watching a movie with a room full of friends who are all chatting, right?
Perfect example.
You're going to miss shit.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the same level of gravity because you're trying to not only focus on, who's crunching chips next to you or who's doing whatever. I have an interesting story about that. I went to go see one of the Spider-Man movies with a friend of mine, and he bought some popcorn, and I could not tune out the sound of him chewing popcorn, and he was trying to be so quiet about it. So like imagine the sound of like someone pulling popcorn out of a bag and eating it. Okay, you've got that sound in your mind.
Yeah.
Slow it down where the person's trying to be quiet to the point that you can hear the popcorn. You can hear the stress of the popcorn between his teeth, like that creak. I barely remember the movie I went to see because I could not tune out this dude's popcorn. Like,
oh boy.
So also maybe that's why I don't really like movie theaters that much. But point being, I'm distractible, and so it took me out of the experience, right?
Yeah. That's a good example of how easy you can get pulled out of flow.
Yeah.
So for now, we are kind of done with Mihali's flow theory. We figured this out. Now we have to take the step to the computer video game thing. And as I told you before, this theory has found its way into many different areas of psychology, into teaching techniques, workforce, motivation, and many other aspects of our life, where it is important to keep humans content about their actions. And let's take a little step back. Do you remember Mihali's original question?
What makes people happy?
Yeah, well, how do you live a happy life? Yeah.
Yeah.
And flow is what Mihaly identified as the ultimate joy. Because it disconnects you from yourself and from whatever worry you might have, which is,
Hmm.
it is a bit weird to think of that, right? That we're
Sure.
happy if we lose ourselves, if we are not ourselves. That's that.
But also, we as humans have base level needs and like biological imperatives that compel us to worry all the time or to seek out food or to
Yeah,
whatever, right? Like things that we can't really turn off that suck, but like keep us alive, right?
yeah. So it makes
Um,
sense that something that actually can turn that off makes us
right.
feel really good.
Yeah, that's my interpretation of it at least.
Yeah. And let's take another step back. Do you feel like that there's anything in your life that ever gave you the flow experience? And you already answered this question. You already
Uh,
said you're mini painting, but you also mentioned that this happened to you with video games, right?
oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. So I'll give you a perfect example. Last night I played Dark Souls 3, and then afterward I jumped into the Discord and played Phantom Abyss. I'm going to talk about these and they're relevant. Sometimes when I'm playing a certain game, people will tell me, well, you shouldn't stream that game, or you should just play that solo because you need your full focus on it. So while I was fighting the last boss of the DLC last night, I was in the fucking zone. But that meant that I couldn't like respond to chat. Like
Mhm.
usually I turn, I talk to chat, I turn, I talk to chat. But like I was focused. I was in it. I was going to beat him. I was going to do it. I had the music on. I had everything. I had trained for this fucking moment.
Yeah,
And so like I just didn't talk to chat. I was in the tunnel, right? And so like um yeah, for sure. Or like I think even further back when I really was into playing World of Warcraft when I was like a
dude.
late teen, early 20s, the feeling of doing a raid where everything is perfectly orchestrated and you have your specific job and you pull it off flawlessly, and the feedback that you get from completing this like completely meaningless task of like you need to kick this boss every 6 seconds on a rotation so that 20 other people's experience doesn't get ruined, like it feels so good, right, to be
It's
like a part of that machine.
it's interesting that you talk about feedback because Mihaly also goes into that these actions, they have to be unambiguous. Like you have to know when you did it right immediately,
Mm-hmm.
which in World of Warcraft you perfectly, you know when you did it right. You
Right.
instantly know when you did it right. And also it has to have instant feedback. Um,
Yeah.
which it also gives you. So World of Warcraft, that's also something I written in this script, is a very good example of a game that can induce a heavy flow state where you lose yourself in the game
Mm.
if you have built the skill to face the challenge. Because as you said, a raid only works like that if everybody knows what they're doing.
Right. I don't know what modern day raids are like because I stopped raiding a very long time ago.
I can tell you, they suck.
Um,
That's what they are.
oh, World of Warcraft. That's a story for another day. Um,
Yes.
but I'm also thinking about this, like, I'm also thinking about how sometimes certain games require you to be in that zone, in that flow. So, Phantom Abyss, um, I can hold I don't know. I usually can hold a conversation while I'm playing games, but playing Phantom Abyss, which by the way, if you don't know Phantom Abyss, it's a game that's it's out in early access right now. It's like what is it? Like, I don't know, Temple Run mixed with Mirror's Edge, mixed with Fall Guys, mixed
That's a
with,
good
I don't know.
description. I
It's
think
very strange.
Temple Run mixed with Mirror's Edge is a good example. It's a good description.
So like asynchronous multiplayer thing, and you're like running through this temple and you're like quick reaction times and shit's chasing you and you're like dodging traps and it gets faster and faster and faster. And as I get further in, I can devote less of my attention to talking to people, to doing anything else other than the game. I have to be in it
Yeah.
or I die. And the second that breaks, like Ruby told me to use a new ability last night, and I tried it and it like broke my way of doing things, and I like almost died immediately,
Yeah,
right? It like took me out of the zone. So yeah,
absolutely
I
does that.
totally think you can get that from video games, and maybe people look for that.
I would even theorize that video games are especially good at inducing flow state because they
Yeah.
meet these conditions in an artificial way. They are the perfect environment to induce a flow state. but like,
Speed running.
dude,
Speed running.
yeah, like
That's my flow state.
the longer you think of this, the more examples related to video games you will
Yeah.
come up with, where you think like, shit, this game too, and this game too. All of these games that I
Yeah.
love because they bring me into this state of bliss, into this state of not existing anymore, because they take up my entire consciousness.
Yeah.
And it's a bit scary too.
I mean, but like I said, man, I think that humans are constantly looking for ways to turn their brain off since the first people figured out how to ferment shit and drink it,
Yeah,
right?
indeed, right.
Like, that's how we are. That's just how we're built, which is weird to think about, as you said. But like, yeah, we're looking for experiences outside of ourselves.
I totally feel like we're doing the Joe Rogan experience. You're like, dude, yeah, man, it's a human condition. You have to do shit like that. And I totally can relate to you now. We have been from completely different sides of society, but now we have found this common denominator, and we can all live in peace together, and everything's cool and all. Yeah, let's not go there.
I once heard Joe Rogan described as the male version of Gwyneth Paltrow, and I've never been able to unhear it.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good description. Yeah.
Maybe he'll set up a website where we can sell psychic vampire stickers. So.
Okay, but to go to kind of elaborate further on this, the satisfaction that I got during my life from gaming is insane.
Yeah.
There's nearly no other activity in my life that has taken me into these complete states of ecstasy. And ecstasy meaning loss of self. And for some reason, the longer I researched, I was like, yeah, losing myself is a really good way to feel happy, because whatever suffering or emotional pain one might have, it always comes from within yourself. It's because your suffering never comes from outside. It's always something that came into you, and then it stays there, and it makes you feel bad about yourself. And if you can make that disappear only for a moment, it's really good, especially as a person that's growing up, because growing up is tough sometimes.
For sure. I think that a lot of people scoff at kids and teenagers at times and like, oh, what do you know? Oh, what are your problems? But it's like, dude, they suck when you're that age, right? Like, navigating a complicated world full of shitty people and shitty things can be really difficult for someone who's just coming into it. And yeah, they're a fucking awesome escape.
Yeah, we get the blessing of video games to kind of make this easier for us.
And I often think back to, I wouldn't say I'm the most well-spoken person I've ever met, but a lot of my early vocabulary was influenced by heavily text-based games that I played, and encountering all of these new big words that I had never encountered before when I'm playing, like, I don't know, Final Fantasy VII or something. You got to read each word, you have to understand each word and the context of them, and like, that's part of development, right?
Dude, yeah, Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 and online D&D comics taught me the English language.
I never asked you that question before. I was thinking about it the other day. I had never asked you how you learned English.
In school, but really bad. Like, people that learn English in school
Sure.
in Germany just speak really bad English. And then online, by being part of the English online community.
Fascinating. I appreciate you telling me that, man. I've always been curious.
But also to think of that this can numb yourself, that this can make yourself disappear, if you go back to that. This is also kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because we have not reached the end of the episode now. It's not like, oh, nice, we have found the flow state. This is why we love video games. Good talk, guys. Have a good day. No, this is going to be about more. This is going to be about how it makes you escape from reality, and how this escape can not only cause happiness, and how this escape can kind of become addictive, and how that can make you feel really bad about yourself afterwards. And I was wondering, is there like people that are video game designers that design games on purpose like this, that they make games that they force you into this flow state because they know that we love escaping reality? And I was
Absolutely.
I was thinking about the games that gave me flow state. I also think it's absolutely that these exist, but I was like, let's think of some games I know that induced my flow state. And I was like, okay, Dungeon Keeper. This is where Peter Molyneux comes in again. And I was like, okay, did
He
Peter
has to.
Molyneux?
He's in every episode.
I have these memories of playing Dungeon Keeper when I was like 13 years old.
Uh-huh.
And I start up the game at 7 p.m. and it starts, and I go into the first dungeon, and all of a sudden I'm in the end level, have to fight the Avatar, and the sun is coming up, and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? and,
Yep.
and then I'm like, did Peter Molyneux in the 80s like buy a magazine like Psychology Daily and was like, oh sweet flow state, let's have some beans, and maybe I can include this in my God simulator, which is totally going to be the only God simulator that I'm ever going to make.
I think you're giving Peter way too much credit and forethought here.
Yeah, he totally obviously never did that.
Yeah.
But how can there be so many games that induce the flow state? If it's not done on purpose, then it has to have some other reasons, right?
I would say that I think that there are some things that could induce this flow state that are not engineered in a way to be addicting. They are simply addicting because they are fun, right? And
Yeah.
we like that fun. On the other hand, companies are becoming more data driven and more in tune with how to manipulate the psychology of people. So, for example, loot boxes. We've been talking about them in the last couple of episodes off and on. Loot boxes tap into this inherent itch that our brains want to scratch of finding things, right? We went and we did a thing and we found it. And it's also like part of what can tap into issues with how people get addicted to gambling.
It's gambling,
right?
yeah.
Right. And so knowing that, companies will manipulate games to scratch that itch so that you give them more money, and they make, a profit off of it. To even go further into WoW, I'm not saying that the original World of Warcraft was some fantasy land, because I don't think it was. But as time has gone on and they gather more and more data, they've started finding, like, how long do people log in for? What metrics can we use to get them to resub to us, even if they don't play? When they do play, what makes them happy? What doesn't? And so, like, the game has become so engineered that it's almost like I've heard people say about new WoW, and I did play it for a little bit, that like, it's like you think you're having fun, but you don't, right? Like it has all the things that you think would be fun, but then they're not.
For some reason, it's not because it's all artificial. It's all just designed into that.
It's designed to tap into your brain, but it's a fake tapping into your brain, right? Like, it's not fun because it's fun. It's fun because it's engineered to be fun. Does that make sense? Like,
it totally does.
They didn't, and maybe I'm not giving the developers of World of Warcraft enough credit, but like, there is a financial incentive to addicting your customers. And, if, maybe some of us can see through the veneer of that, but others are not so lucky.
Yeah. Let's jump ahead a little bit, because you're saying something that would come up a bit later, and that is that we totally see that in games, especially that we currently play, because the industry is so refined by now and has so much data about how the general populace consumes these kinds of games. But there was a time where that wasn't the case, where people like Peter Molyneux or Kim Swift would create games that could also send you in a flow state in such a perfect way that you wonder how they achieved that. And I thought to myself, how did they achieve it? And then we come across something that we hear all the time while these people create their games, and that is that they play them themselves.
Right.
All the time during development, and they try to figure out the spots that are fun, because they lack a better word, right? They don't know how to describe what this state is that they get into, that they enjoy so much. But they actively seek out flow by playtesting vigorously.
Right.
So I was looking, because Mihaly, he never finds the connection to video games. He has no interest in that. He never talked about video games. This is a connection that I came up with. But it's actually not, because I was like, maybe there's a connection between flow and video games, and I was trying to find a connection. And I Googled it, and there's a bunch of studies by people that study video games in connection with these that actually think that video games are one of the strongest factors in flow-inducing activities. And I found this study from 2018, which was done by two psychology majors in the Thai University, where they monitored the gaming behavior of 500 students that were all like avid video game players, and they tried to analyze which kind of games got them into the flow, because they had the same questions like why do people go into flow in video games,
Right.
and they wanted to know how this influenced their relationship to gaming. And the first thing they did is, after collecting all of their data, which when people say that they're in flow and shit like that, that they were figuring out how to structure this information. And what they noticed is how they could separate the conditions for a flow state, which were these 7 conditions, into 2 disjoint groups. They call the cognitive flow and the emotional flow. And this is important to something that you just said about World of Warcraft, how it eats you up sometimes, but sometimes also feels good. So cognitive flow is all of the things that take all up your concentration and are connected to the skill that you need to have to do something. It's like that the challenge skill balance is good, that you feel good about it, but also that the goals in the game are clearly set, so you can you know what you need to do, but also all of the feedback is unambiguous. Just like you said in World of Warcraft with raiding. And if all of these 3 were met, you could go into cognitive flow. And cognitive flow is the kind of flow that makes you feel really good about yourself. It does not already make you lose yourself. That's not happening. You just start feeling it. Yeah, fuck, this is hard, and I can do this. This is really nice. And the game instantly shows me that I'm really good at it. This is awesome. Like, you're playing Guitar Hero and you're hitting every note. It's just incredible. You just can't break out of it. And this feels, and they notice that to all the people that experience these conditions of the cognitive flow, it feels really empowering. So it's not only losing yourself, it's feeling like I can do something. I can change something. Then there's like emotional flow. And this takes up the rest of the conditions, which are like that you're completely concentrated, that you lose all feeling of self. And they noticed how students that encounter these emotional flow experiences, that they didn't always feel better after going through flow. And it often made them feel bad afterwards. Because even though the condition itself, like being in the flow experience, feels good, afterwards you feel like you just wasted your time and you missed out on doing things. It's the bad side of the coin, right?
Right.
And they actually, like 36% of the students that they ask all claim that the flow experience actually hurt them as humans, because they use it to escape reality in a way, in such a way that it's harmful to them.
Well, think about it, right? Like, just to use WoW again as an example, I got into WoW when I was a teenager in high school. Like, I had to use my mom's credit card like to get my subscription because I couldn't do it myself. And when I think about all of the good memories I have from the early days of playing WoW and the socialization I got, and like to those of you who weren't around 15, 17, whatever fucking years ago it came out, it was really something, because there just wasn't that big of a game that had that many people that you could talk to at one time. And there was this whole element to it. And so it was so easy to get lost in this other world of all, there wasn't a Discord that you could pop on and hang out with your friends, unless like your raiding guild had a Ventrilo server that they paid for or something like that. So it was a different world. And the reason I'm saying all this is that because like I got super sucked into WoW, and I think about like, I had all these awesome experiences, but when I look back, like, man, I blew off so many people and so many things just to raid in WoW. And like, was it worth it? I'm not sure, looking back, it felt like it was worth it at the time, but here I am removed from the experience later, and it's hard for me to tell whether I would spend that time again.
Yeah, I have the same thought. And this is the power that video games have over us. It's this two-sided power that they have, that they can both make us feel empowered, but they can also make us feel like we wasted something, we lost something because we were too engrossed in the process. They make us feel competent and strong, and they push our self-worth, but they also make us forget our troubles and the real life.
And sometimes we shouldn't forget our troubles,
Yeah.
Like, sometimes it's really easy to just be like, well, I realize I have 100 responsibilities piling up, but, I got to get sick DPS in this dungeon, bro.
So yeah, I kept on digging into the whole flow thing, and there's a whole lot of papers about it in connection with video games, on different takes on for human society and how we must or must not change our approach towards video games, blah blah blah. But I actually had no interest in that question. I wanted to know something else, and I wanted to know: is there a game designer that creates their game? Like the thing that you already answered, that creates the game purposefully in such a way that they do well at inducing flow. Like, I don't want to just generally claim, yes, of course they do. I want to know someone. I want to tell a story about a dude that's like, I'm gonna make a game and I'm gonna make them fucking addicted to it because I know how to get them into the flow state, and I'm gonna take all of their money from them. I wanted to see if that exists. And
that brings us to Electronic Arts.
I was like, is there some stand-in Electronic Arts villain that's gone to just like, how's that guy? How's the CEO called? Probst?
Larry Probst.
Larry Probst, where he pops out of the shadow and he's like, it was me all along.
And he twirls his mustache. Give me all your money.
And like, of course, I always stumbled across these people that were there was an article like, why Dungeon Keeper induces flow so well. I didn't care about people that do it not on purpose.
Right.
I wanted someone that, like, of course they put their hearts into their games, and the Dungeon Keeper is filled with love of Peter Molyneux for perfect worlds and perfect games. I don't give a fuck about them. I want people that extort people for their inner sense of self-worth, and they want to take everything out of them to make as much money as possible. I want to have someone that says, fuck yeah, let's manipulate people. And I wanted to have an example to tell you a story about that. And I did some digging, and I found someone that actually claims that they used the flow theory to create a game. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be my evil guy. This is going to be the
Who
villain.
are you going to ruin for me? Who's getting ruined today?
I think you don't know him. He's called Genova Chan.
I don't know him.
He moved from Shanghai to California. He studied in California, in Southern California, and he researched something called dynamic difficulty adjustment. And using this dynamic difficulty adjustment and the theories of Mihaly, which he read thoroughly, he created a flash game called Flow, which is named after Mihaly's theory. And he created this game along with his master thesis and provided it for free for everybody to download. This was already a bummer for me, because I was like, yeah, this is not going to be my villain. He gives away his game for free. It doesn't even have microtransactions. I can't make this guy look bad. So I was a bit bummed out, but I kept reading, and I figured out that the main idea of this game that he made was that the difficulty does not need to be adjusted by the player, but in some menu where you say, I want my game to be hard, it adjusts subconsciously using the actions of the player during the gameplay. And his idea was because flow very much relies on this challenge skill balance, that it's evened out so it can completely take over your information flow. And it must also feel like you're in control of the entire process. And because all of your actions influence the difficulty, you feel in control, but also this challenge remains exactly on your skill level. So you have perfect conditions to enter the flow state. That was his plan. And he was trying to prove a concept that you can create this on purpose, and that you can on purpose create these video game conditions that induce the flow state. And by tying all of these adjustments In the game, to the player's actions, Chen tried to create fertile soil for the flow experience. The game was a pretty huge success because of that. People felt like it feels so like that it felt really good to play it for some reason, and it was so well received and nominated for a bunch of big prizes like the BAFTA award, and
Wow.
it just felt really good. And Chen was able to create that on purpose, which was a really important proof of concept, because for now we just think like, of course evil companies use that to abuse people, but we just claim this. He did it. He wrote a master's thesis about it.
Well, I think that we should probably differentiate between difficulty scaling based on player actions and manipulative programming to get you to spend money, right?
Definitely.
So like, I don't know, what we were talking the other day about Alien Isolation and how as you get better at trying things to try and beat the alien, it learns with an AI to then try and stop you. So the challenge is always there. You can't do the same, thing multiple times, right? You have to always be on your feet. Or even shit like, I don't know, like a roguelike. You always have to be adapting. You always have to be thinking, even if you're good at the game, right? Okay. I think that kind of, the game learns based on your actions and then tries to get you into a sense of flow is different than we have purposefully engineered this game to be addicting to get you to spend money.
It absolutely is,
right?
which is why I was so disappointed in Chen. I wanted him to be more evil, but he wasn't.
Well, at least we've got a hero of the story.
Yeah. So Chen, our disappointing hero, after graduating with a master's thesis.
Oh, I wish he was more evil.
Yes, we always have an evil guy in every story, right? This time we can't have
do.
it. So he founded, just say EA is the evil guys again.
Sure.
After graduating, Chen, he founded this game studio called
Evil Assholes.
He founded this game studio called That Game Studio. That's the name of the game studio. And they went on to create more games, one of which you might know, and it's called Journey.
Oh, fuck, really?
Yeah, he made Journey. And
that's so cool.
Used the same principles for that game.
Huh, that makes sense.
A friend of us played this game a lot. Mm-hmm. And in the game, you kind of control a robed figure that wakes up in this desert between huge monuments, and you got to travel through a pretty huge but desolate world. It's a huge journey. The game is what the title says.
Right.
And it's really pretty and fun to play, and you can totally see how Chen took a similar approach by making it an environment where it's easy to get into the flow state. And Journey, as you might know, was very well received as well.
Oh yeah, tons of fanfare.
Yeah, even though people say that all of these games by that game studio, they're more art than game, if you know what I mean.
Right.
Even though I find the distinction a bit unnecessary, but it kind of holds up, right?
I think it just depends on what people are looking for, right? Like gameplay can be anything from push a button and watch an experience to there's no story, you just do things, right? Like there's a whole spectrum there, and I think that defining what is a game is the lines can be blurred.
Yeah,
I think we all have in our head a definition of what a game is, but games are art, and I think of game genres almost like different styles of art.
Yeah,
and I might not be into postmodernism or whatever when I go to an art gallery, but I might really like Renaissance shit or something like that. I'm just spitballing here, but
yeah,
I think that it's really like when people bitch about, oh, well, that's just a walking simulator. It's like, well, fuck off. Maybe I like to walk around, like maybe that's fun to me.
Walking simulator has become kind of a derogative term for games without content, even though that's not true. There's simulators in which you just walk, and that is in of itself something desirable if you want to do that.
Well, but I think that some people want stimulation in a different way, right? And that's what's fascinating, is that we're able to tailor games to specific types of people who think in specific ways, right? Like I've been watching some of our friends play Factorio, and I see Factorio, and I think Factorio is absolutely fascinating, but my brain doesn't work that way, Like I can see it, I can understand it, I can see why someone would become really addicted to it, but my brain just doesn't pick it up,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't get me in the same way that playing like a Sonic would, right? Or playing I don't know, Mega Man or something like that. One of the ones I grew up with.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm super into platformers. So
yeah, there's different kinds of games, and all of them are kind of art, which is why I find this distinction a bit unnecessary. But what Chen says, and he was kind of the only guy that I found that had a company that actively puts flow into their games.
right.
What Chen says that he isn't money hungry. His first game he gave out for free. Then he had this contract with Sony to make his games for them. But he
Right.
has no interest in creating multi-million-dollar products. He doesn't want to use flow for evil or make people addicted to his games in such ways that they can't stop playing it. He's not. He kind of, in a few interviews, he kind of seems to be like an enemy of this AAA game culture. He just wants it all to be niche games that are weird and innovative. He's pretty cool. I should check out more of his games and what he's doing.
He sounds
But
pretty
he's
cool.
not the villain I was looking for. And
Yeah.
I kept digging and I realized two things. I will not find this stand-in EA saying, hey guys, so we made this game to manipulate you into doing nothing else anymore. But what I did find is dozens of articles and papers going into different aspects of Mihali's theories and what they mean for game design. Articles by people that are on the forefront of game design, from professors at Princeton to students of game design all over the world. And what you see, if you look for this, is that flow has moved into the center of attention. And if you think of yourself as a game designer, you should spend some time reading up on the flow experience, because it's one thing to use your gut to figure out what's fun, and it's another thing to be able to look at a piece of game design and have the psychological knowledge about why this will suck people in or why it will not. It's like a craft all of a sudden, not just intuition. And
I also think
Yeah.
that maybe this is a little off topic, but like, this is going to be a weird question, but like, do games have to be fun? And I know that sounds crazy, but like, games, you know, we're talking about what makes games fun. Why do we enjoy them? But like, I can think of things that I was glad that I played, but I look back and was like, I don't know that I had fun playing this.
this is a
Right?
really good point. And I'm not sure that it's required for a game to be fun.
Right.
No.
But I mean, like, is, you know, art is made by an artist, and why they choose the medium that they do to create the item that they produce is up to them. And you know, I think it comes down to, what is it you want out of that piece of art? Do you want it to be commercially successful? Well, then it should probably be fun.
Like
right?
if I play a game
If you're
like
making it just
The Stillness of the Wind, for example, which is also, people would describe more of an art piece as a game, but this game isn't fun. It makes you feel really sad. And in the end, you sit there and like, why did I do this to myself? But I'm glad I did this to myself. I
Right.
think that's what you mean, right?
Yeah. So like, I don't know, you know how like there's all these movies that are, I call them cry porn. Okay. So they're just there to make you sad.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, hey guys, did you know the Holocaust was really fucking horrible? Let's show you how horrible it was. With the story of a sad kid whose legs got blown off or something, and the whole movie is just him scraping through, right? I might, as a person, want to experience that to understand the trauma that those people went through so that we never repeat it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not fun, right? Like, and so Andrea is constantly asking me like, hey, you want to watch this movie? And I'm like, what is it? And once I get a feel for it, I'm like, I don't have it in me to be sad today, right? Or I don't know, I don't feel like a scary movie tonight, right? I'm just I don't have it. And so I think that, like, I don't know, I just wanted to make that distinction between fun not necessarily being the goal, unless your goal is to be successful, in which case then yeah, it better be fun.
Yeah, that is very important distinction, that of course not every game that's designed has to be built under the condition that if it doesn't induce flow, it's shit. No. But
Right.
you can but certain games profit from that. And one should be aware of this. And I don't think that creating a game that induces flow is easy because, just like the quote at the beginning by the poet, any outside force or gravity will immediately pull you out of that flow. So if there's mechanics that these could also be like quirky mechanics that work bad, or bugs or things breaking the predictability of the entire process. Like, imagine if you play Dark Souls 3. The game gets you into flow so well because Dark Souls 3 is smooth as fuck.
It really
Yeah.
is.
There's no bullshit in this game. There's nothing. There's no bugs. There's no glitches. It's just smoothness. So there's no gravity pulling you out of flow. This is why Dark Souls 3 is one of great examples of a game, if you get into boss fight mode, that gets you into perfect flow, fighting Sister Friede for 17 hours. I don't know. Yeah, but creating a flow-inducing game, what I'm saying is that it requires a lot of precise work. It's not an easy craft. Just because you know the theory doesn't mean it's easy. And because you have to treat this tiny corridor between boredom and anxiety, these are two words that Mihaly uses a lot, because like if you have the challenge skill balance, if the challenge is too high and your skill is too low, you experience anxiety instead of flow. And if your skill is too high and the challenge is too low, you experience boredom. You get bored. So you have to find the balance between that. But in the end, like, humanity's love for these games started growing out of people losing themselves in these games and finding a way to escape whatever worries they have. And a well-made game appropriately challenges you and lets you flow into a blissful state of nothingness. That's why we love these games. That for this is a mass market that is so loved by people. It's an escape.
Yeah, and I totally get it too, because think about when you find a game that you really like, how you can just really lose yourself in it. And I'll say that, like, there's almost a comfort in the familiarity of what you're doing and being good at it. And I think that people seek that out. So like, but I don't know that it's necessarily specific to video games. Like you mentioned flow within movies, you know, like my fiance, she loves Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I need to talk to your fiance about Buffy. I'm a huge Buffy geek.
I love Buffy. She has Buffy t-shirts, and like she's met like James Marsters and stuff. And like, anyway, point being is that, you know, she watches Buffy just over and over and over and over. And I told her one time that I think that the reason that she does this is because it is familiar and she can just zone out to it, right? She knows all the twists. She knows all the lines all the characters are going to say. She knows exactly how they're going to go. And she doesn't have to devote, like she can just be in it.
That's really
right?
cool, yeah. One important question though, Spike or Angel? Okay,
are you asking
you don't
me?
get the reference. Okay, it's fine.
No, I get the reference. Spike, absolutely.
Spike. Yes.
Fuck Angel and his stupid spinoff.
Yes.
Okay, so actually, I never actually watched really. I've seen some Buffy. I never really watched Angel that much. I think maybe saw like one episode. I heard it was okay. That it kind of was like not as good, but that's just personal preferences of people who have talked to me about it. By the way, they made those into comics later that continued the story.
Ooh, sweet. I didn't know that.
Yep, there are comics out there that are, I think, like analytical, direct continuations of those characters and the stories.
So what I did figure in the end, to get back to our story, is that there probably, as we already assumed, that there is some evil corporation that makes these inescapable game loops that also induce the flow state to bind you to their games, like Sauron bound the Nazgul to his ring, shit like that. And they will be able to do this, maybe not only by theorizing about how to build a game, but also just by testing them thoroughly and doing these questionnaires and figuring these out, and then having these, looking at Mihaly's theories and adjusting the scale of difficulty to exactly fit the scale of the testers and the emotional state of the testers. And because Mihaly's models of flow are publicly available and very well known, and especially among game designers, as I said, I found so much information about people discussing this on game design forums, where flow seems to be like the state of art of how to make an engaging game. And it kind of makes sense too, because the video game market is so it's oversaturated that you need to find a way to beat your competitors. And the
Right.
big companies have to do that, and the indie developers have to do that. They have to find their own little patch of land on this market. And they can't just do this with dirty advertisement anymore, like we heard in so many episodes, or corporate
Mm-hmm.
espionage, but they have to make the the games induce a state of, if you call it immersion, if you call it flow, or get you into the zone, they that they grab your attention and don't let go of
You
it.
know, I'm wondering here how much this has been perfected by the usage of early access. So back in the day, you might get a demo of a game in a magazine or some shit, or someone would copy a floppy disk for you. Um, and then, you know, the feedback was a lot different when early games were being made. And you were talking about testers. And I find it fascinating now to think about how early access has removed a lot of the way that games were originally tested, because now you're essentially putting it out to the market and say, test it for me,
Yeah,
right? Um, and so you get feedback then on what would induce a fun gameplay mechanic, you know, and what was fun and what wasn't by releasing it to the mass market before it's ready.
yeah. It's really interesting how the market changes in that way. That all of a sudden the
Mm-hmm.
testing is in such a broad scale and connected to every consumer all at once.
Well, then you have people too who are like, I won't buy early access games because I'm not going to pay to test your game that I might not like,
Yeah,
right?
and I feel like even though this
So,
episode starts kind of we kind of got into an uplifting session there where it was about all about happiness and how to be happy and how
mm-hmm.
to escape yourself and have a content life. And now I feel like because of this, the thing you're saying is this is probably abused quite a lot, that we're kind of drifting into this dystopian painting that we're drawing all of a sudden. And this is a bit weird, isn't it?
Well, I think that we're constantly being manipulated in every aspect of our lives all the time by people who want our money and our attention and our data and our whatever. But that was all. I think that was always going to happen with the advent of big
Yeah.
data. And you know, video games are not removed from this, right? They are ultimately, even though they are art, video games as we typically conceptualize them are still a product that they want us to buy, you know, and people's livelihoods depend on whether or not we give them that money.
And I also think
And
because this is our hobby and we love it, that we should be aware of it.
of
And
course,
it helps to be aware of it.
yeah, understanding the flaws with something you love can help you to appreciate it better when things are shitty.
Yeah. And I think it's also a dystopian picture because Mihaly, he found that we are happiest when we can be not ourselves, which is weird, right? For a while, but
Yeah.
occasionally we have no choice but to be ourselves, as you said. And I do not want to stop anyone from gaming because of this, but I feel like with this knowledge that we probably mostly love this hobby because of how it makes us feel smart and strong and competent, and to be honest, makes us feel like we are not in this very scary world anymore. We should at least spend a minute to consciously make the decision of escape instead of falling back into it because it has taken control of us.
So I don't know if this helps any of you, but the way that I have been able to enjoy video games in a very busy life that I live is that I will set aside time and I will specifically say, I am going to do all of the things that I need to do today, or at least some semblance of them. And then during this time and that time, I am going to play this game, and that's it. And it's like I've earned it, right? Like I know that during between 8 and 12, or I'm just making something up here, I'm going to be playing whatever it is that I want and I'm going to lose myself in it.
Yes.
And that allows me to then have a balance between all the garbage I have to deal with on a daily basis and then also be able to enjoy the things that I'm doing, right? Like I'm sure that you've tried to do some kind of fun activity and you can't stop thinking about all the other bullshit in your life. That's one way that I separate it. It's almost like they're in two separate boxes, right? Or like my fiance and I have this thing where, not even just about video games, like when we sit down to eat and like have some time to talk to each other, we start off with, okay, let's get all the work related bullshit out of the way first, and then we're not allowed to talk about it. We're putting it in its box, right? We're going to forget about it. And so like that's how I managed to keep this balance between being hopelessly addicted to a game and my real life stuff is that I delineate, this is the box that it lives in, and I'm going to get into that box for this certain amount of time, and then I'm going to step away from
Yeah, I
it.
think that's a really good point. It's to be the one in charge and use this flow that the video games can give you to empower yourself.
But you have to be conscious of it.
And dude, life is tough, and to actively escape your life, to return stronger and more confident because there's something that makes you feel like you can make a change, that's a good thing. And this is how this episode started, right? It's when I started researching this, it's because you told me in another episode that I play these puzzle games because it makes me feel like I'm in control. And I was like, dude, you're absolutely right. That's why I play these games. It makes me feel in control. It makes me feel better about myself.
I was just re-listening to that episode for something the other day. I was looking for some specific thing, and I listened to that part, and I was like, "Oh no, I broke him." That's interesting.
It did stick with me for a bit, and not being able to change this world is so frustrating. And this is the best thing we have to feel better about this mess.
Yeah.
And just how these words initiated the creation of this episode, that the words that you said, your words will end it. What do you think of this?
I think that this is a really fascinating thought exercise, and I'm really glad that we did this. And this is, as those of you who have been listening for a long time will note, this is pretty different than anything we've talked about before, at least in episode format. But I think that video games are like anything, right? They're easy to lose yourself into them if you want to. And that can be a really good reset, right? Like putting yourself in someone else's shoes, putting yourself into a situation you'd never be in. There've been studies that stuff is good for the brain. It can help you to understand other cultures. Video games are an awesome tool, but they're just like anything that, we seek them out for a reason. And we have to be careful that reason doesn't overwhelm our real life, right? And so it's important to have these kind of discussions, I think, because much like Dachz said, understanding why we do the things we do can help us to enjoy them and can also help us to not ruin our lives with them, right? So I obviously love video games. They have significantly influenced my life in a positive way. There are other times when I think back and I'm like, man, I kind of burned some bridges over some dumb shit with video games, right? And that's learning, right? That's learning what your limits are. And that's learning. Guys, I don't think we should play football anymore. Guys, I don't like this anymore. Scary Docs came out. Ooh.
Yeah, I buried that guy deep in the woods together with my copy of Blood Bolt.
But it's okay, right? Like we all have things that make us mad, and we all have bad days, and we all have these confluence of we were talking about this lately. I'll tell a small anecdote. I had a stream the other day where like nobody showed up. Okay. And there's a few reasons for that. I started early. One of our friends was also streaming at the time. I was playing a bunch of random bullshit. Like people were at work. It's the middle of summer. There's a whole lot of rational reasons why no one showed up. Right. And then I got really grumpy, and I was just like, ugh, I'm so mad. Like, bruh, no one showed up. I just wasted all this time, right? Going back to something we talked about earlier. I put all this time in and I put all this effort in and I didn't get anything out of it, right? And so like I talk about having emotional brain and rational brain, right? And emotional brain was like, I'm so mad about nothing. And rational brain just keeps looking at emotional brain and being like, dude, this does not matter at all. This is like totally fine. Everybody's cool here. You'll give it like 5 hours and you'll be completely over this and have forgotten about it, right? But emotional brain says rah. And so I think that, you know, video games can be really good at tapping into emotional brain, but we have to have rational brain to keep emotional brain in check. And that is me making some bullshit up on the fly about how my brain works, so mileage may vary, but I really enjoyed this.
And
this is a short version. Thank you.
I'm sorry if any of you were expecting a different kind of episode, but I do like to cover weird bases of related to video games, and I think this is important in future episodes because we only ever think of the motivation of the consumer in very financial terms and in very broad terms, but I think now we have a baseline for maybe a psychological level of how video games are experienced that we can use later on to fall back on.
Yeah, but I also think, you know, I appreciate that sometimes you do some episodes that are more broad and discuss concepts rather than, you know, I'm usually very focused on, well, today we are going to talk about Crash Bandicoot or something like that, right? And it's a self-contained story, and we might be able to have anecdotes that we pull here and there, but like I also think it's really important to have the kind of discussions like we just did where we talk about like, well, why the fuck are we doing this at all? Right? Like what is the fucking, why do we even care about these things? Why do we care about having a plastic device in our hand that can make a pixelated hedgehog move on a screen? Why do we do this? Right? So I think it's good to step back. I appreciate this episode. Good job.
Let's talk about sources for a second before we end this. I have 4 main sources. It's a TED Talk from 2004 by Mihaly himself. Please look at it. It's like 20 minutes long. He's the coolest dude. I love him so much. I can listen to this guy endlessly. He's really nice. Then there's an article called Flow, The Secret to Happiness, which is a scientific paper. Then I have another scientific paper called Flow Experience in Computer Game Playing among Thai University students by Supat Sanjamsai and Daruni Fukau, and the flow state's influence during game design process by Ramon Diaz, and the last, Flow Theory Game Design by Think Game Design. Yeah, and these were all very helpful to create this episode, and I hope you all enjoyed it.
Yeah, good times. Thanks to all of you who listen. Thanks to Quad Laser for producing our music. And anything else you want to say there, Dachz?
No. Stay true to yourself and use video games as empowerment and not only as an escape.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Be good to each other out there. I'll see ya.
Bye.